Hey, Devon.
Hi, Alex.
So when I think about Mars, I think of it almost like the ultimate desert island. I mean, this is a pretty bleak, hostile environment up there in isolated in outer space. And I imagine, this little spacecraft setting down on the surface of Mars. And it's almost like arriving on this desert island. So you have quite a few things you have to think about if you're going to survive in this environment. So what about the basic necessities of surviving on Mars? Like, where are you going to find food? Where are you going to find water up there?
Well, water is the easy part. There's actually an awful lot of water on Mars. It's all just frozen. Food is another problem. The first problem that you're going to have, actually, when you arrive at Mars is you're going to want to get in out of the sun. Your first job is to get yourself a shelter. You'll probably bring the habitat with you, but you might want to bury it because, unlike the Earth, Mars doesn't have an appreciable magnetic field, which means that when there are solar flares or just the everyday solar wind, the charged particles that are coming off the sun all the time, you don't have any protection from the solar wind or solar flares, which means that you're getting exposed to some radiation there. Mars's atmosphere is very thin, so it doesn't provide very much of a barrier either. The UV radiation there is very intense. SPF 500 would not be enough for you on the surface of Mars. So all of these things combined mean you want to get under cover fairly quickly. And your shelter has to be able to withstand the radiation and also screen out the UV radiation that's coming in. So odds are you'd set your shelter up first, and you'd probably actually even bury it a little bit. You'd probably pile up a lot of the Martian rocks and dust over top of it as an extra shield.
So before you even start thinking about, let's say, growing food on Mars, you're going to have to set up some kind of environment that will allow the types of things we eat to actually flourish.
Exactly.
It's not going to be happening out there in the Martian soil.
You're certainly not going to create soil out of the Martian dust and rocks. Now, because of this intense UV radiation, the top level of Mars, the upper few inches and centimeters, are actually baked. They are sterile. Scientists are convinced that they're dead. The closest example we have to that is in the Atacama Desert here on Earth. And scientists have actually gone to the Atacama Desert looking for life in certain spots, and they don't find it, not on the surface. You actually have to penetrate underneath that baked crust before you'll find anything alive. And, a lot of scientists think that might be the case in Mars as well, that if we're ever going to find life on Mars, if it ever existed in the first place, we'll actually have to go down deep.
Coming back to the desert island analogy, let's say you're the first human beings to set foot on Mars. Maybe you're okay with the water situation. Food-wise, you're probably going to have to bring most of it with you in your spacecraft, at least to begin with, right?
Yes, exactly.
Eating out of packages, astronaut ice cream, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you might not bring too much astronaut ice cream.
Oh,
the
man.
main thing that you're going to wind up eating, well, I hope you're a vegetarian because you're not bringing
Don't say
any
Brussels
animals
sprouts.
with
Don't
you.
say Brussels sprouts.
No, you're going to eat something called spirulina.
Spirulina. Never
which
had it.
Apparently, neither have I, and I'm not anxious to try. You can find it at health food stores. It's often used as a health food supplement. It's very, very nutrient rich and bland. It's basically sort of like an algae, not terribly appetizing. The crops that you will wind up growing are some of the more basic crops that we're all used to, and vegetables. Don't expect anything terribly exotic. You want to get something that's really, really hardy, that can grow under those types of conditions. And there's a lot of researchers, including a research team here at Guelph University, who are working on developing the techniques for growing plants in space and also possibly in Mars, and what kind of situations that will happen in and how densely they can grow them, because you don't have very much of a volume to grow them on your spaceship if you're growing any of them that way. And by the time you get to Mars and set up your greenhouse, which will probably be sent ahead of you, you're still not going to have a whole lot of room. So you need to grow crops that are going to give you as much nutritional value as possible for the least amount of work and energy and nutrients input.
Is it possible that astronauts could ever walk around outside of spacesuits, or for the first little while anyway, will we pretty much be confined to spacesuits and bubbles or subterranean living environments kind of thing?
There's actually some really neat work that's being done with respect to Martian survival suits. We're all used to seeing astronauts, whether it be the Apollo astronauts or when they're doing a spacewalk at the International Space Station, wearing these big, bulky suits. Well, we won't necessarily need those when we're on the surface of Mars. Mars does not have a great atmosphere, but there is a little bit of an atmosphere there. The temperature is not as extreme as we see in a vacuum environment. So we only see temperature variations of around 100 degrees. On a good day, you can actually get it above 0 centigrade. But then it, drops down to about minus 100 at night. So that's not terribly wonderful. Plus, it's got a bitter wind chill there.
Oh.
So the idea of these Martian survival suits that are being worked on are really interesting because they'd be much less bulky than the traditional spacesuit. But you would still require them to move around because Mars, while it has an atmosphere, it's a very, very, very thin atmosphere and is primarily made out of stuff that you don't want to be breathing anyways. It's lots of carbon dioxide in that atmosphere, hardly any oxygen. So it wouldn't be able to support life, even if you could open up your helmet and
take a whiff.
And take a whiff. I wouldn't recommend it.
So for the first little while, then, Martians will be bubble people, essentially.
Yes.
Okay.
Bubble boys and bubble girls.
Okay,
yes.
So I'm curious, what about, what will people do in those bubbles? I mean, I assume the first people will be pretty busy just making sure they can just basically survive. But, sometime in the future, will there be multiple people up there? Will there be any kind of entertainment? How, in terms of, just keeping sane in that type of environment, what will the astronauts do?
That's a really good question, and I don't think we really have a good answer for that, because the way things are right now, when we send someone up to the space station, for example, they can get set up for a very, very long time, months at a time, and they're kept really, really, really busy just staying alive and maintaining the space station and then doing scientific experiments. If we send people to Mars, and this is a long way in the future, we're talking 2050, maybe, if and when we do send people to Mars, they won't be staying there for very long, simply because it's a difficult job that you're asking these people to do. Psychologically and emotionally, I would say it would be very, very challenging, but also physically it's very challenging as well. We don't know what the long-term physiological effects of living in a reduced gravitational environment like Mars would be like. Mars only has 38% of the gravity of the Earth, so it's not the same as being up in a microgravity environment like on the Space Shuttle and International Space Station, but at the same time, it's not what we're used to. So we're not sure about what the physiological effects of all of this will be. So anyone who's going, at least in the near to middle future, will only be staying for a short time, just a few months. And you've got a long trip out, stay a few months, and then a long trip back. And that time that you're on the surface of Mars, you're going to be really, really busy because you'll be setting up your habitat, you'll be maintaining that habitat, which will be a full-time job for several people. And at the same time, there's tons of science that you'll be doing.
How about internet access? Will I ever have internet access on Mars?
Oh, definitely.
It'll probably be pretty slow, though, right?
You'd be surprised at how quick the access will be for communicating to Mars. Simply because right now, with all the orbiting probes that we've sent and the landers that we've sent, they're developing new and better capacities for handling tremendous streams of data. They'll just have a nice long time delay.
Okay, so let's say you've spent your time on Mars, and you're pretty much sick of the red planet. You're hungering for some real ice cream and not spirulina ice cream or whatever, and get me out of here, right? So how do astronauts then get back? Because I assume they burn up a lot of fuel on the way. Are they going to have to make fuel when they get there to get back, or what?
Yeah, they probably will. That's one of the things that the International Space Agencies are exploring is they call it in situ resource use. And that means basically living off the land. So creating your air supply, your water supply, growing your own food while you're there, and also creating your own fuel. And you can actually extract the elements that you need for your fuel from the environment around you. And there's actually, NASA runs some Centennial challenge projects, kind of like what the X Prize was, they call them the Centennial Prize, around being able to transform things like lunar regolith, the rocks and dust on the surface of the moon, turn those into rocket fuel. So the same thing can be applied to Mars as well.
Okay, so word to anyone who's thinking about going to Mars, make sure you pack your SPF 100 at least.
I'd say about 5,000.
About 5,000, and maybe a few DVDs in case you get bored, and sneak in a packet of astronaut ice cream, unless you really like spirulina.
I think you'd get sick of the spirulina pretty quick.
Thanks, Devon. That was awesome. Thanks for stopping by.
My pleasure, Alex.